I don't need it anymore. Can I just say, on behalf of myself and all of you watching, man, this sucks. Just like all of it, the whole thing. You probably didn't want to see my face again for the next few years at least. You're probably sick of me. I'm sick of me, and I didn't want to do this. I mean, I had other plans to follow. The last thing I was expecting was for Flight Yansim QF-94 to crash land in my front lawn. Was it my fault for thinking that a 2-hour video would cover enough to halt the tides of destiny, even remotely? But, you know, time makes a fool of us all, and it seems that as soon as my video went up, everything happened at the same time, which has created the most critiquable version of Yandere Simulator to date. And I'm kind of forced to revisit the man in his game so soon after the last video 6 months ago? Maybe it's been longer than I thought. Now, I should warn you, this won't necessarily be the exact same style, tone, or length, hopefully, as the last video, because, honestly, I might not be in the correct emotional state to do that again, so if you want that style of video, go watch my last one. Diesel did a video as well. I was in it. You could watch it, but you could also watch me talk about today's sponsor.
Ridge Wallet is the working man's wallet, or just anyone, because it's stylish, it's efficient, it's made out of metal, it doesn't break, it's compact, and it looks really cool. This thing stores so many cars you'll think, wow, that stores cars all that nice. But that's not all. It also stores money and clips to your belt. If you just want to clip two of the things to the back, which is what I did because it's significantly more efficient, and it was really easy. And guess what? It hasn't degraded yet because it's not made out of leather. Countless positive reviews, lifetime warranty, the whole shebang. You can get it in any color, a bunch of materials. It's just a nice time all around. So use the code Kappa at the link, get 10% off, all that. You know the drill. Get on it. Thanks for the sponsor. Love you. Now, there's been a whole gaggle of misdemeanors that's happened since my last video, like too many to count and cover. I'm not going to, but luckily for me, recent stuff can be quite convincingly tied with some previous events, which saves me some time, work, and emotional stress. Just kidding, that's gonna happen either way. Getting specific, I'm talking about the fact that Osana and the official demo of the game has been released, in case you haven't been keeping up with the inner circle, so to speak, or you watch my videos for my pretty face. Oh, hey, my name's Kyle, with an X, and I'm 21, but I look 26 and I feel 100. Osana has been a major sticking point for criticism over the last half a decade because, briefly, she somewhat represents the lack of core components and direction for the game's previous builds, and in a greater sense, she also acted as a sign of slow progression, as she was 1 out of 10 rivals, and she was just never in the game. So seeing her to any degree would elicit a sense of joy from onlookers, which was clearly people's reaction and the exact emotion I'm feeling right now. While I most likely would have critiqued Osana's release under most circumstances regardless, because her constantly being mentioned was mostly symbolical, as the problem lied in the issues to which she is somewhat related, not the fact a rival with red hair named Osana isn't literally in the game. Alex quite kindly made my life extremely easy and gave me the opportunity to self-promote, because if you go watch my last video, also buy my merch, at the point where I rapid-fire critiques that technically don't hold water because it was a debug build of the game and therefore not official, almost everything I say is still completely correct. The only real change was that the gym is now not a stolen asset as far as I'm aware, it's also a custom-made asset that looks like the stolen asset, so that's pretty much it. And I would love to pump myself up and even throw around a profit here or there, but being brutally honest, most of the critiques I made were pretty face value because there's not a whole lot of layers to how this game is being made. Unfortunately, I do not know how to properly format this video because my brain is too dumb. If only there was a video released alongside Osana that includes Alex using extremely explicit terms to describe her development process, which henceforth could be used to critique him in a way not previously seen, while also jumpstarting this video and acting as a point to return to later, giving the video a cyclical feeling that neatly ties together the start and the end while recontextualizing the forthcoming experience. Oh wow, what a surprise! On the 1st of September, Australian time, we will bestow this cherished gift from Yandere Dev himself, titled with words. Now, many a thing was said in this ballad, but there's only a few parts that really matter. Most of it reads like his upcoming Kickstarter ad, more on that later, with words like fun, polish, and otherwise. The two things I deemed important were the parts where he talked about Hitman's opportunity mechanic and how it inspired the schemes of Yandere Simulator, which he labels with their
replayability as the main draw, and the fact that he stated Osana kept getting delayed because of volunteers who worked slowly. At face value, it does seem like he's blaming people who work for free and humiliating them in front of his impressionable fans, because that is exactly what happened, like verbatim. Remember when he responded to my video by saying it's immoral to humiliate someone in front of millions of people? Ah, what a classic. There's just something about a man who's willing to put high schoolers on body pillows calling me immoral that's just unbelievably funny to me. Honestly, if this whole game dev thing doesn't pan out, he could just go into stand-up. Do you know how annoyed I am that the things he says earnestly, on purpose, are way funnier than the jokes I write for my videos? I mean, do his fans not see the obvious and comedic contradiction of he's just one man? Like, how is the game being delayed constantly because he's only one man working on it, and also because there's more than one man working on it? Ignoring the extremely fucked up idea of basically throwing people who work with you for free under the bus while you pocket thousands to buy another Nintendo Switch, those two ideas are mutually exclusive to anyone with brain function, and I'm going out on a limb here, I would say he does. Maybe if he could do fucking anything by himself to any level of competency, he wouldn't need so much slave labor to complete it. God, just imagine how much wait time would be removed by just being talented at something. But honestly, I don't want to talk about Alex that much. I'd rather talk about the demo, because believe it or not, he did in fact invite criticism of it here, which I obviously wasn't waiting for, but is now made more fun by the fact it's state endorsed by our great and immortal leader. I'm sure if this is seen by certain people, they're just gonna say, oh, well, he could have been nicer, and sure, I could have, but why would I fucking bother? Alex doesn't give a shit about my critiques even when I'm right, and when it comes to Yandere Simulator, that seems to be most of the time. Now, there's only two outcomes here. Critique it truthfully and it's unnecessarily mean, or critique too softly and it can be ignored, and the third option, which is I'm going to change everything anyway so it doesn't count. So I'm just going to genuinely critique it how I feel. And it is the gold rush of critiques, because there's something unique about this build that hasn't previously existed. And I'm not talking about Asana. Everything that I'm going to critique regarding her has already been lightly mentioned previously, because many of her flaws were just visible from his videos that he publicly uploaded. No, what opens so many possibilities is the fact it's called the demo, like officially, on purpose. It's no longer the debug sandbox with all expected faults. It's not a demo in the way you would imagine one, but Alex is calling it that. It is designed to be a somewhat polished, somewhat enjoyable, generally playable slice of the rest of the game. So it's supposed to make people donate to a future Kickstarter. This means that there's suddenly a lot more things to justifiably critique now that the it's a sandbox defense has completely evaporated. Before I continue, since I'm trying to accurately review the game from my experience, I would actually like to mention what I liked about it. Don't worry, this section's going to be short and peppered with fine print. The main menu is kind of nice. There's still kinks to work out on the whole functioning part, but the design, it's relatively interesting. The voice acting is, at its worst, only kind of strange, with most of the actual sounds being perfectly fine. I would rather completely different dialogue altogether, but it feels like most of the voice actors are really trying, and it definitely softens the blow of the lines that were written like a parody of itself. And finally, the music, even at its lowest points, is still really good and extremely varied, and well above the standards of the rest of the game. To the point where, if there was no music, I don't think I would have made it through the playtime required to review the game. That was it. Somewhat strange that those things were done by volunteers, like there's a recurring theme or something. To me, mostly everything else was either majority bad, like the writing, or something that could have been good, that was surrounded and crushed by incompetence. So let's get on to those. For the sake of time, let's just acknowledge the fact that he consistently takes ideas, themes, mechanics, and so on from Hitman, Persona, and every anime, and then just not delve too deep into how strange and kind of wrong that is, and instead focus on how he takes things and whether he does it correctly, because I just don't have time to describe the nuanced differences between a homage and copyright theft. I'll start with what I mentioned earlier, with the scheme mechanic, which brings forward the first major issue of the game, which is that it struggles to find a balance between too much and too little information. When you start the game, you are presented with a wealth of options, and all of it is entirely pointless at this time. You can watch an anime, which is just Death Note, and supposedly it teaches you how to electrocute people, as long as by teach you mean omits specific details included in the scheme, making it entirely redundant. You can see stuff you haven't unlocked and have no idea what they do. You can check on the corkboard, that exists, look at the shrine that could unlock new abilities or could be entirely pointless with a new item available each week. So, one item, a basement with nothing in it, a town to buy things for your objective, whatever that even is, and finally school, the only viable option, making me wonder why you're shown any of this without explanation. Now, that whole thing is from the perspective of someone who hasn't played the game before and hasn't watched every single Yandere dev video, which, if he wants the game to succeed, will be an undeniably large percentage of the player base. It has no introductory phase or anything, it just fucking starts, and then some text boxes that start popping up when you do specific things, but they have the Xbox interface, even though I'm using a keyboard. Did I break it? And then on the extreme opposite end of the spectrum are the schemes that, unlike the opportunity mechanic in Hitman, do not have to be found, but instead can be bought really easily at the start of the first day. I love capitalism. God bless. I get into the problems with the actual process of acquiring them later, but for now I want to focus on how schemes actually work because it's at best strange, but mostly a fucking insult to be compared to Hitman. Firstly, every scheme is explained to such a granular extent I find it genuinely difficult to understand how you have fun using them, because if there's one thing I love in my video games, is a climactic moment only completable after reading what is essentially a washing machine instruction manual. I'm being slightly hyperbolic here, also known as on-brand, but the point remains that even the most basic schemes have unnecessary steps with unnecessary amounts of detail, like the aforementioned electrocution, Jesus Christ, and the crushing scheme, which I'll be referencing going forward. Its first step is stats needed to complete it. That's a good idea. What's less of a good idea is then proceeding to tell me exactly how to increase the stat with exactly how long it's going to take, with multiple choices. Well, thanks. I almost had to think. Like, is it really necessary to teach me something I learned by attending class in school, which is basically mandatory, but telling me if anything is useful in the room I spawn in is just beyond the capabilities of the demo. At this point in time, the scheme mechanic is entirely devoid of anything organic. The player has very little decision making in the process. Everything that's laid out in the scheme will happen exactly the way it's listed. It doesn't tell you to find a bucket, it tells you where to find one. Exactly. Like, if an integral item is too hard to find that's used in multiple schemes, the solution is to make the game more accessible, not to just give you the answers. Why? That's not a solution. The biggest choice you get in the entire situation is when to tell Osana to arrive at the location, which would be nice if it wasn't entirely pointless. As far as I can tell, you don't need to know her schedule because you can't accidentally make a scheduling conflict. As soon as the specified time comes around, Osana just turns off all brain function and just beelines it straight for your location, which is kind of funny. Like, the scheme is one step away from just having the game complete it for you. There's literally no obstacle here. This would all be an entirely moot point if they actually worked like opportunities in Hitman, where they are, get this, optional. Because in Hitman, when have problem, gun. Man have gun. As I've said before, in Hitman, sloppily firing 17 rounds into the target is an inefficient but viable way to complete the mission, given bad circumstances or just, inexperience, which some players have. Unfortunately, Yandere Simulator is, if nothing else, a carbon copy of Hitman as described by a child. If you attempt to do a similar thing, this fun little mechanic comes into play called the Rybaru, who joins the fray and says, no thanks, I'm good. Hitman demonstrates a spectrum of elimination options, from the untraceable ghost to the caveman with stick. Now, both sides are completely fine, it's just more a matter of where you find fun on that spectrum. Yandere Dev, as he says himself, enjoys the untraceable ghost end of the spectrum, going back through missions and finding all the opportunities. So, as a result, when implementing that idea, he intentionally or not, handicapped every other option, making his favorite playstyle the only functional one. There are mechanics in place for Caveman with Stick, it's just Rybaru completely ruins them. Her existence alone has offset everything, so the fancy, unique elimination methods have been pushed down to the option for both the lowest common denominator while also being the only one, because the 17 rounds to the leg method, or trying to kill Osana with stealth mechanics without using the IGN walkthrough, or straight up abusing flaws in the game system, is damn near impossible because of the unshakable bodyguard that can't be sent home because she doesn't have a phone, except she totally does. Side note, he actually changed this recently after receiving this critique for what feels like a year or something, and it now reads, she keeps her phone on silent, which I'm not sure is much better because that's not how phones work. Does she never check her phone under any circumstance, including the circumstance I showed 5 seconds ago of her checking her phone? Man, this totally isn't a knee-jerk reaction, this solves everything. For the most part, Osana cannot be killed through traditional methods while Raibaru is near, because if she happens to spot you while you're killing the person whose toes she's standing on, you freeze in place and are forced to fail. While at the same time, Raibaru is completely invincible to all traditional forms of elimination a new player with limited experience would attempt. So the only way to complete the main objective is to either kill or circumvent Raibaru. Both methods being so fucking specific, purchasing this game is required, meaning quite ironically, the playstyle a new player would default to is the hardest way to play the game, because it requires you to abuse specific flaws with the ultra-perfect high-level tactics, not even using my brain. They would actually be somewhat of a challenge if some of the steps in the schemes were more generic, but the game isn't designed to allow that, which raises the biggest issue. Because they're way too specific, most of them cannot be discovered or completed without using the baby mode walkthrough. The only conceivable way for new players to complete the demo is through a single mechanic that takes all agency away from them, following a step-by-step list that constricts them to that specific order, with no variants because everything is preordained, and tampering with it even slightly risks the whole thing not working, or at worst, soft-locking the game. Perfect. Once again proving that in order to take something from a game you like, you kind of have to understand it, because in Hitman, you can set how opportunities work. A lot of information, even from a distance, somewhat guided when interacting with something related, or just off completely. And even the easiest guided option that no one who plays the game likes is a less hand-holdy way to approach this situation than Yandere Simulator. The way Alex talks about his fondness for the game in his videos, like all the fucking time, makes me think that he understands what he enjoys, but he doesn't even attempt to think about why. It reminded me of a story about the development of Outer Wilds, which is a game I plan to make a video on, i.e. I've already written the script because it's so fantastic in so many subtle ways. In an insultingly basic description, the game is about exploration with all these neat little planets and expansive lore that which was very interesting to playtesters, but also very overwhelming because it was difficult to understand where to fly, even though generally no matter where people went, they enjoyed the sense of exploration and discovery. So the problem was, how do we give people that feeling of discovery and the type of enjoyment that they feel without forcing them to explore, possibly ruining it? This, by the way, is what creators wake up in a cold sweat. Funneling people into experiences you know that they would enjoy without being overbearing is one of the hardest things to balance, especially in games intended to not have that much direction. The answer was surprisingly simple, and kind of genius, in my own opinion. They just added an extra step in the first conversation where an NPC asks you what you wanted to do, placing agency on the player to determine what was generally interesting to them, from a varied list without actually scaling the entire game down to a checklist that felt like it had to be completed in that order. And the best part is, the choice doesn't do anything. They're all generic and meaningless, but the point was to make the player decide and then give them the opportunity to find where they wanted to go. And judging by the fact I'm talking about it, you can probably guess that it worked. Giving people vague and interesting choices got them over the first and only real hurdle. After that, their first discovery pretty much set them off on the whole thing and, create their own story, and the enjoyment of discovery was maintained by specifically trying to, delicately adding just the tiniest bit of guidance so the player wouldn't notice. Which I didn't. I get the feeling if this kind of idea was implemented in Yandere Simulator, there would just be no conversations about vaguely defining each planet or a museum of unique things to garner interest and give you agency, making you feel like the journey you made was entirely you from your decisions. And instead, you spoke to someone and they told you exactly what to do, and if you didn't, the game crashes. The game crashes a lot, I should say that. The Yandere Simulator crashes. He recognized the obtuse design as a problem before, but instead of designing the game to help or teach people with supplementary information if they ask for it, he just made blocks of text mandatory. Long story short, stop taking things from other games you like without understanding how they work or why they were made. It looks amateuristic at best, but mostly it's fucking pathetic. Something that I couldn't criticize as a game mechanic before was the Panty Shots. All I had to go on was the fact it's morally repulsive and that it raises the question whether or not Yandere Simulator is a game or a thinly veiled excuse for a grown man to fetishize Japanese schoolgirls, which is clearly such a weak argument. No wonder they made it into the demo. In the most genuine way I can possibly convey this information, this is actually the most consistent part of his game design, because where its implementation uncomfortably exploits anime schoolgirls, I use it to exploit the game's mechanics and beat the demo in 5 minutes using a scheme he wants players to use. When the game starts, you can just run backwards behind the 5 gals. I'm not using the Japanese word, I'm not a moron. Alex has made their Panty Shots worth 5 times the median, amendment in a second, and place their spawn point behind every other student, meaning in the first minutes you can have 25 points, and you only need 20 to buy and complete the crushing scheme, one of the fastest, safest, and easiest methods, which can be completed before the first class has even started. Now, I should put here that Alex actually changed the info point mechanics on the 11th of September build, where he hastily threw it together because I guess he realized, no, people aren't just going to start liking it now that it says demo. Even his fans started criticizing it until, of course, Alex finds their posts, locks it, has the mods delete all the comments, provides a shitty manifesto of a response, and then bans them, because that's the Yandere dev way. The new system is as follows. Panty Shots are worth 5 times what they used to. Shots from popular students, which are the people I mentioned before, are worth 10. A stolen phone is still worth 20, which is nice. Photos of students' faces are now worth 1, and placing bugs has been changed from 10 to 5. That's a nerf. Wait a second. I somewhat commend Alex for actually listening to people, but he also loses all of those points by only hearing what he wanted to and not actually fixing the issue and implementing real work that changes nothing. The problem with Panty Shots was firstly that they are extremely grotesque, but also that the gameplay amplifies that and funnels you into doing them, making them the fastest and most accessible way to earn points, also being mandatory for certain elimination methods. Essentially shooting yourself in the foot if you didn't want to use them, because I don't. Planting bugs already existed in the game, but were so neglected and obtuse you can't reasonably expect people to use them. The only real mention of them is in the tutorial prompt for how to earn info points, in which they are mentioned. No details of what to look for. There's no like landmarks that show you where you could find one or any hints. You just have to find them based off no information. It tells you have the bugs, and that's about it, even though they're also just scaled down security camera models, which is finished demo, guys, am I right? Now, I tried to find all the bug placements in the school, using only the tutorial as my guide. So, no guide. I found 6 out of 10, which sounds good until you learn my methodology, which was fueled by desperation. I just ran around the school slamming into everything, waiting for the prompt to show up. Which is how people don't play games, because it's not fun. Some of the places can be deduced from general game sense, even with a lack of information. Student council, meeting rooms, that's a given. Sensitive information, that's all good. Photography club, they're kind of sleuthy, a little bit of wild cards, so knowing what they know is valuable to the weird girl in some kind of way. And then there's places that you kind of have to know about beforehand, like the faculty room and the headmaster's office, which are off limits because one of them is just the faculty room, and the other one has a dude that wants to tase you.
Identify yourself. Who the fuck are you?
That's kind of rough. And then there's some, as in more than one, that are just relics of an old build that Alex seems too lazy to remove. Under the table of the chemistry club. Why? Railing next to a conversation that's left over from when Coconut was the test rival, meaning there's no reason to come here in normal gameplay. A fucking corner of the wall outside that exists for the exact same reasons. Under a sink in the shower room, because if there's a perfect spot to record audio, it's in an echo chamber of water being constantly blasted. And finally, a spot that didn't even have a button prompt for some reason, next to the delinquents, because apparently the highlights of Thrasher magazine are of the utmost importance.
But as I was editing this video, Alex changed this and removed these events. The bug outside has been moved, all is well, my critiques were unfounded, and Yandere Simulator is a perfect game. Except of course it's not, and him fixing it made me look a little deeper. I will again, for the time being, ignore how strange it is to constantly patch what was supposed to be an official, definitive demo, which historically do not get patched often, and will instead point your attention to these dates, which mark the dates Osana was hinted as the first rival, and when bugs were implemented. You would think, or at least hope, based off current events, that the order goes like this. It doesn't. Osana was teased as the first rival basically at the start of development, and by Alex's own admission in this video, Coconut was not intended to be anything more than a placeholder, meaning that the amount of time between Alex knowing this had to be removed and when it should have been removed at the latest is longer than when it was in the game. So this problem was entirely created by him for no reason, and fixed several years after it should have been, and almost a month after the latest acceptable time. See the future, kids. 2016's development. Today!
And now, completing the objectives from that arduous journey gives you as many points as just holding C and then using the camera. Being able to earn points from taking normal photos that don't gross me out is a cherished benefit, but the most efficient point gathering method is still Panty Shots by a now even wider margin because of how easy it is to do. Stealing phones is great and all, but it's like bugs in the fact that it's quite obtuse to figure out and it's a massive waste of time. The complaints regarding Panty Shots wasn't to have any alternative because that already existed, and it wasn't for how long it takes to earn points. The only thing this update changes, the complaint was, it's fucking weird, remove it, you creep. So not only are Panty Shots an extremely gross mechanic, it's also extremely exploitable and one that offers little to no challenge in completing the demo, and yet in my entire playtime it still remains the largest obstacle by far. Because this game, wasting 10 seconds of my time actually makes me reconsider playing it. As soon as you realize playing the way you want isn't viable, and you just relegate yourself to using the shitty IGN walkthrough that Alex admits is the intended playstyle, the game does not suddenly become a test of my mechanical skill or game knowledge. It makes me question whether or not it's worth wasting my fucking time. Up to this point in the script, I still haven't unlocked the debug menu, which isn't to say it's hard, just boring. I spent several minutes following a guide where afterwards I suddenly had 4 whole days to do nothing, and the thought of spending the next few minutes as bored as I had spent the last few was enough to make me quit. Perhaps there's some great treasure to be found beyond the final cutscene, but if the game takes a few minutes to complete and can't elicit a single second of entertainment from me, why the fuck am I playing it? So yeah, the game's not long. You can quite easily complete the demo on your first day with literally no experience, possibly accidentally. I killed Osana in about 15 minutes on my second try, 5.5 on my third, and under a minute on my fourth. And I'd like to say that I beat the demo on my first try, but I didn't, because the game stopped letting me play it. Unfortunately, the method I used to eliminate Osana within a minute has been patched out, so I can't say I've eliminated Osana in less than a minute on the current patch, which brings my best time to around 5 minutes, which is still mighty pathetic for Osana's official release. But as many of you are aware, I am not the only person that exists. The reason I did the 1 minute strategy was to see if this video was repeatable. This channel, by the way, is heavily watched by Yandere Dev, because the moment a new run is made, he pretty immediately patches it out, and all the circumstances that allow it to happen, to which Hatsune responds by doing the exact same strat, but just slightly differently. And I thought about saying as of the time of this recording, but it doesn't matter. He can fix as many bugs as he wants, because these problems will always exist, and even if they don't, you can still eliminate Osana in less than 5 minutes on your first day before class using an official method that isn't bugged. I suppose this leads me to the greatest part of the experience, which is the fact that despite this being the culmination of multiple Osana delays because of bug fixes, and the fact that this is supposed to be a triumph, celebrating all the work that's gone into Osana, the official demo is actually worse than the previous builds. The main positive of the demo is the fact that it has Osana, a tenth of the main objective, that was unfortunately completable in under a minute upon release with almost no hassle, because despite what Alex has constantly spouted about Osana, she hasn't been bug tested to any acceptable degree. It seems that somehow Osana being added to the game has completely broken almost every aspect of the experience, which is a shock to me because I definitely didn't see this coming in the slightest. The official demo release may somehow have more bugs than any previous version of Yandere Simulator. If you've been on any Yandere Simulator related subreddit, whether it be the official state endorsed one or anything else, you can't have missed them being completely flooded with game-breaking bugs, including this treasure, because I don't know, fuck it, why should you be able to complete the demo? Some that I've personally experienced have been, with some sense of brevity, the game straight up crashing, which is a given at this point, incorrect animations, incorrect models, animations not being shown, models not being shown, models despawning on the map, characters completely stopping all actions because of different reasons, character models slowly rising while speeding up time, characters getting trapped in walls, off-screen deloading of animations and models occurring noticeably on-screen, and finally a bug in my first playthrough where the option to tell Osana about the letter in her locker didn't show up at all, completely removing my ability to use that method. Later, while testing 720p for further on in this video, like a point, I loaded into a save file that was previously at 1080p, and everything broke at the same time. The bloom was so aggressive it was actually impossible to see through. Rybaru broke and just ran off into the abyss, never to be seen again. Most of the students just completely despawned entirely, and those aren't just bugs that I had, they're bugs I had footage of. Footage, by the way, that totals to an hour and a half. Not all of that footage is even gameplay. A not insignificant portion of it is just loading screens or me walking around the school aimlessly because the game bored me so much I would rather be doing anything else. I know it sounds obvious coming from me. I have a pretty clear bias against the game and its creator, but genuinely, I wasn't trying to find bugs, I was trying to do that later. I was trying to record my attempts to see if eliminating Osana was as brain dead and as quick as I was expecting and to time myself. I wasn't doing weird combinations in the game trying to break it. I was playing the game the way Alex explicitly told me to, and they just happen all the time. For instance, the model and animation deloading thing was more common than it not happening. This is also the reason why I'm 100% confident saying Osana was not remotely bug tested by anyone, because the way I caused this glitch multiple times was when the game finished loading the school and was fading out of white, I did nothing. I found it was more common if I wiggled the mouse as if I was, I don't know, preparing to play the game or something, but it still happened a surprising amount without me touching anything. Even with animation and draw distance completely disabled and on different graphics settings, which, by the way, is what I was using to benchmark the game. Another fun experience. I've had a long-standing issue with Yandere Simulator, somewhat because it runs horribly all the time, but mostly because there's no realistic way to fix that. When Yandere Simulator starts, it gives you the option to change resolution, which isn't really an option if you're trying to sell the game to people that aren't his fans, meaning they actually own expensive computers and aren't children. People aren't really going to review this game well if they paid $2,000 for a computer, a fucking beast of a machine, and they get told to turn the game down to 720p so they can turn on shadows. People aren't happy with that. The third option is graphics quality, whose implementation is extremely misleading, pointless, and overall patently Alex levels of lazy. This feature feels like something from an early concept stage where it's from, and probably should have stayed. I've had issue with this ever since I saw it, but now that it's officially a demo, I can now critique it as one would expect to critique any other demo, which is what's going to happen. If I was a new player and I didn't understand how games used my computer's hardware by what each setting does in specific detail, which is almost every human alive, and I wasn't confident that I could play it at the highest settings, I don't have that high-end hardware, or I just noticed low FPS in previous sessions, which, is most of us, I would want to use this feature and expect it to function like graphics settings in every other game. It doesn't function like every other graphics setting in other games. If I was expecting that, I would be sorely disappointed, because despite it saying graphics quality, what it should say is texture quality, since graphics and texture quality are different things and interpreted differently by the end user. So before I go any further, it is my legal obligation to tell you what comes next is hella technical and mad fucking boring. Now, lowering texture resolution is not an uncommon thing by any means. It's just usually not the most prominent thing when adjusting graphics, because it's a very yes or no kind of situation. If your graphics card has more total VRAM than what the game's textures use, you're basically fine, since the usage is quite flat, and if you exceed that usage, it's bad. Consumer graphics cards come in a variety of VRAM sizes, multiples of 2 mostly. All modern ones are 4, 6, or 8 gigs, sometimes more, with some lightweight laptop processors having 2 or less. The reason many of you may not know what the fuck I'm talking about is because nobody gives a shit. Texture quality has not been a very important setting for a very long time, and honestly the size of VRAM on cards today is a bit excessive. They only really get that heavily used at 4K, so I have no idea why it's the first graphic settings you see. For some reason that still hasn't been fixed, despite being in the game for years, is lowering the texture quality lowers the resolution of the button prompts. What buttons are these? And when testing using a somewhat repeatable benchmark, I found that my FPS had dropped by about 1 in every single category on the lowest setting. So removing the margin of error, there's no difference between these two runs, and the texture quality changes that and nothing else. Which, by the way, is also entirely pointless, because at max the game uses 3.8 gigs and dropping everything to the lowest uses 3.3, which is a nominal difference at best, and both settings are still below 4 gigs of VRAM, but higher than 2. The game doesn't cycle textures that fast, so I'm struggling to think of a reason this setting even exists so prominently. I'm not even expecting it to do much. There's obviously going to be more noticeable differences between the settings if the game had more textures, i.e. if the game was finished, but just don't have it sitting there pretending like it's doing more than it is, or that it's a graphics preset. It's so fucking lazy, especially since the graphics that do affect performance are rare and hidden away, because asking how to increase FPS gets you banned. Great. No matter what he says, deep down Alex knows the game runs poorly, and he knows his fanbase constantly has issues with it. So maybe a solution to that would have been to implement, for the official demo that's supposed to make people donate to the Kickstarter, a transparent and forthcoming idea of how settings affect hardware. Games do it a lot now, and it's extremely appreciated. It's useful for all types of players. It's always applicable. Like those little bars that show you how much VRAM each texture setting uses. That's above and beyond for an indie game. Even just saying whether or not the setting has low or high impact of performance in extremely general terms is still fantastic for new players. Or just have a fucking benchmark or something. You seem pretty happy making stuff in the game that's only for videos. Some games still don't have benchmarks. Dude, Death Stranding doesn't, and it annoys me to no end. Imagine having that over Death Stranding. You could be God. I know how computer parts work and how games use them, and I still have to guess whether or not any of these settings do anything. But no, the game runs fine. Delete all comments. Post locked. Thread removed. Banned for harassment. The only consistent-ish way to improve the frame rate is to just brute force it and render less things in frame, which is a necessary evil in some games with large draw distances, but is downright insulting seeing as Yandere Simulator isn't doing anything at all, and even then, turning on shadows still ignores all precautions you've taken and just tanks the frame rate regardless. All this obviously leads to the how did this happen? Other than the obvious answer of it being the culmination of everything that's happened over the last few years, just to ignore that. It's pretty obvious now that the demo build was extremely rushed and not even finished. As much as Alex kept saying Osana was being delayed because he wanted to release her with the demo and for it to be noticeably different from the debug versions with more features that made it feel like a slice of the final game with Osana being rigorously bug tested, the whole thing was an unpleasant mess. He just kept going on about how Osana was being tested and that he was bug fixing every elimination method. Remember when he said that? And only to have the demo on release include a bug where if the framing method was used, it has what looks like the wrong texture used, and then it just soft locked the game under every single circumstance. So despite all the testing he's done, one of the major elimination methods didn't work and was extremely easy to find, leading to two possibilities. He lied about bug fixing to some major degree, or just completely, or two, he did fix a large amount of bugs over the months and years he's been saying he has, because the original build of Osana was so broken that it was just malware. I know it's option 1, but I really like option 2. And seeing as the game gets a page of bug fixes basically every day, from an outsider's perspective, that looks horrendously incompetent and desperate. People make fun of game demos that get patched at all. Like, they relentlessly mock them. And desperate certainly is the theme to this whole release, because behind the scenes, Alex is in a lot of trouble, something you may have inferred with him seemingly using the word Kickstarter more than and. I glossed over it previously, but the signs are everywhere in both the demo and the corresponding video. Pretty basic functions like changing the gender of senpai are proudly displayed, only to beg you for money. Wow, that was cool. It seems that, quite counterintuitively, the demo is designed to show you all the work Alex can't be fucked to do. Back to the video, he shows off the new post-processing effect in an attempt to wow newcomers and also hide how completely mediocre the game looks. The vignetting is atrocious, it just slathers everything with a pink glow. Motion blur actually made me feel sick for the first time in a game, and seeing as it's disabled by default, I don't know why it's here. That bloom makes the game physically difficult to look at, even when it's not bugged out. And if, like many people, you have fog enabled to increase the performance of the game, which is necessary, the sky turns pure white and makes it impossible to go outside. And finally, depth of field, which has been added so poorly that playing in a resolution higher than the one he plays on, 720p, just breaks it. Zooming into the character models breaks it. Opening the game to the main menu just blurs the title of the game, and talking to another student blurs them out entirely, as if the game is ashamed of the models. Yeah, it seems like Alex didn't prepare for people to play the game with different settings than him. It's also not that great a look to add new graphics features that look bad and don't work, then proceed to talk about the Kickstarter for the 11th time in the same video, asking for money, as if the money he's already received has been a remotely good investment. So it's obvious that he's feeling the heat now, and I suppose the real question is, why? As previously mentioned, Alex needs two things to complete development: people and money. Luckily, the first need will be solved by the second. Unluckily, it's money, which binds us to society and that he doesn't have or is reasonably able to earn. The easiest solution to his problem is, as he says, to use the Kickstarter goal of $100,000 to act as seed money, so we can then hand off development to an actual studio. Problem 1. $100,000 is a hefty price tag. It's still less than other video game Kickstarters, but even then, they're usually further in development without asking for money on Patreon before a proof of concept is complete, have a better looking product, or just have good production value and respected developers on a team that can quell a potential backer's fears that the team isn't experienced. Now, imagine Alex a few months ago. His game should be far in development, but doesn't have much to show. There's a lot of placeholders still. Previous builds are public and horribly unstable. His video production experience is limited, only uploading in 720p with audio that hasn't been treated or edited to cut out the dead air or rebalance his microphone that comes out louder in one ear, even on his streams. And everyone who works on the game is a volunteer, meaning they're inexperienced and aren't people a backer would recognize or trust. All of a sudden, $100,000 seems somewhat unlikely, and the blow would be softened if he had funds tucked away from the previous years of cash flow. Something you would rightfully expect if you donated to his Patreon. Unfortunately for you, something that doesn't seem very clearly listed is that money over $3,500 goes towards his development. Everything under goes straight to him, personally, meaning he hasn't set aside money for development for more than 1.5 years, which is like my entire career at this point. So all the funds that could go towards the 100k goal were earned years ago and have probably diminished over time, and if his leaked emails are to be believed, he used to owe around $30,000 to TinyBuild for breaking off their contract before he whined his way out of it. Also, judging the fact that he has 800 Steam games, a second Switch, and impulse buys games constantly, especially new ones, it's not unfair to assume he might not have the best fiscal responsibility when it comes to his own money, making the prospect of giving him $100,000 a bit more challenging to justify. It is also worth noting that despite what he says with the transparency posts and the fact that his personal money can be spent as poorly as he wants because it's his personal money, which is, a good point in a vacuum, it is worth noting that nobody's stopping him. The person spending their personal money very poorly is also the person who is charged with spending development money correctly. Nobody else can stop him. Nobody can veto any decision he makes. Everything that he says is final. He doesn't have to tell anyone about the financial stuff. There's no management going on. He's the only person with control or complete access to funds, which is it's just way too much power. Problem 2, he trapped himself with his own words, but more than usual. He needs a Kickstarter before, everything fizzles out and all people start to catch on, but he couldn't rush one out, since if it fails, you can't fall back on the fans. He hammered in the idea of Osana being released with the demo and going to Kickstarter with that. If he didn't do that, he's directly betraying his fans, and they're loyal, but are they that loyal? So he has many problems as he has had before, with the difference now that every method of procrastination has been milked until death, and every single aspect of development is now solely dependent on Osana. He can't go any further without developing her and implementing her into the game. And she really wasn't finished. All of a sudden, Alex can't just laze around and put in the minimum effort and then just say, fuck it, I've done my 9 to 5, I'm going to stream today. Because something he has to realize is, he's not an employee, he's the boss. If the game is behind schedule, the blame rests on his shoulders and he has to put in the overtime. He's actually been forced to work under threat of people noticing he sucks at his job. He streams almost every day at the same time, but leading up to the demo's release, he didn't stream for several days before and after, almost like he was too busy or something. Like a responsible person. Unfortunately, since he spent the last few weeks working hard, and the last 5 years not doing that, everything's kind of piled up, so he can keep pushing out bug fixes as much as he wants. The demo is going to remain unplayable for a very long time. That's why Osana's out now. I very much doubt he's proud of this version of the game, but he literally has no other choice. He needs the Kickstarter soon, he needs it to succeed, and he's trying to prop the entire thing up on a pretty unimpressive product, which isn't to say it'll like fail, just that the odds are stacked against it, especially considering most of the people who would donate to him they're already on Patreon. That leaves very little wiggle room for extra cash.
Before this video ends, I would like to point out something just for clarity's sake, and as a preemptive rebuttal to one of his fans potentially criticizing this video for being too hung up on the initial demo release, with some of the things I mentioned being patched out and therefore not relevant. The reason I brought them up is similar to how I explained Osana. The problem wasn't the fact that there were bugs and oversights in the demo, it's what their blatantly obvious existence says for the future of the game's development. Like on the 16th build, where Alex made it possible to skip the rest of the week if Osana was eliminated. How did it take 16 days to figure that out when it's a problem you can experience in your first 10 minutes? The reason why these constant bug fixes look so horrible for the game's image is because it is now increasingly apparent that Alex builds and fixes the game within the realm of how he's playing it. The reason Koguna's bug event made it into the demo release is the same reason Panty Shots are, and always have been, the best way to earn points, because it's how he plays the game. Aggressive depth of field above 720p, he plays on 720p. He doesn't care. The reason Rybro's immortality doesn't bother him as much as it does the rest of the player base is because he plays using schemes, where Rybro is basically a pushover, a female senpai that should be somewhat easy to implement even as a symbolic gesture. Alex wouldn't use that feature. He would much rather create a fictional anime even if it adds significantly less value to the game for more work. No mouse controls on the menu with strange keyboard button mapping that can't be changed. He plays on gamepad, so he just doesn't care. Which is the whole point. He just doesn't care about making a game that's fun for the players, because he has fun playing the game in the only viable way. And if that niche idea isn't rewarding for you, tough luck. Maybe try giving him some more money so he develops the game properly. Alex is basically just creating his own little fantasy thing, where he just adds things he wants without trying to make the game fun for others. It's why there are countless things taken from anime, games, and movies he likes, but still randomly flip-flops between the game being serious and a shonen anime, while also struggling to make crouching useful in a stealth game. He just has no idea what he's doing, desperately trying to reach the end goal without building the foundation, making the whole experience unpleasant and strange, even for me, someone who understands the game's development. I mean, honestly, to end this review, the best way I could put it is that the game is horribly unfun for me, and it's being developed with such little direct intention. I don't know what part of the game is supposed to be fun. I don't think Alex knows that. He has fun, and that's all that matters to him. So yeah, like a 2 out of 10. So far, that's my coverage of the game itself, and seeing as there is a possible Hate and Shame 2 around the corner, I might have to dust off the gloves once again, seeing as this video was surprisingly long, while basically only being about the game itself and the development. So, back to the actual video where my face is in it.
And that's it for me. My script is done. I have nothing more to say. Thanks for Ridge for the sponsorship. It makes it seem like they're my only sponsor, but I only release one video a month, so that's unfortunate. Thanks for the fellas for supporting me. I actually want to get videos up specifically just for them, like update videos, which may be coming soon. So if you're interested in that, join with the membership thing below. But I wouldn't get too excited about it because my computer's currently a little not functional, and I don't know when that's going to be. Hopefully soon, because I want to edit this video. And apart from that, oh yeah, buy my merch. Subscribe if you're interested in the Nisium book review that I was doing before this fucking crash landed down on me and ruined my life. Or the Outer Wilds video that I've already completed and am waiting on some stuff. The script. I've completed the script, I should say. Yeah, this took a lot out of me. This is all one sitting, and I've been recording for 1 hour and 40 minutes of what appears to be constant talking. So I think I'm done. I'm gonna go cry now, or maybe I'll just be asleep. If I can cry while being asleep, I'm gonna go do that. Alright. See ya.